Trauma defaults allow a customer to access pre-configured patient data information so that they can acquire images immediately without waiting for an official order. I'm now going to show you how to configure your trauma defaults.
To configure trauma defaults, you'll first need to log in as a key operator using your key operator username and password. Select Key Operator Functions, System Configuration, and then Trauma Default. You'll notice a very blank screen when you get here, and that's just because you have not created the names of the trauma buttons that you would be using. The trauma defaults are actually under the trauma button for the specific name. First thing that we're going to do is create a tab on the bottom, a new tab of the button names of my trauma defaults. You never really need anything more than a 4x5 because you're not going to have more than a couple of trauma defaults configured on your system. On this screen, we're only giving the button name. We are not putting the default information here. This is just giving the button name. So if I highlight my first button and I title this Trauma Male, I can then do my second one, which is going to be Trauma Female. I also like to differentiate between the two by giving them a color to the buttons. If I select color, Trauma Female is highlighted, and I give that a color, I can then go back over to my Trauma Male and give that button a color as well. So again, the first step here was to create the button names for the trauma defaults. Now I want to go to the bottom left-hand side of the screen and create the actual defaults that will come up when the patient is selected. If I select Trauma Default for Trauma Male, I can now put in the information that will come up automatically when I select the Trauma Male button. If I type in trauma, first name male, I like to be able to identify if I have multiple trauma males at one time, and I do that by selecting the trauma last name, and on the bottom side of the keyboard I can add a unique number to it. So when I select Trauma Male, the system is automatically going to generate 0001 and the next patient would be 0002. Again, this makes it easier if you have multiple male patients at the same time. Any of your other highlighted fields must be populated at this point, and so with patient ID being mandatory, I select that and I give it a unique number, which is going to give the trauma button a rolling ID number starting with 0001, and then the next patient that I select would be 0002. Once I've completed all of my mandatory fields, I save my changes. Back one screen allows me to select my Trauma Female and configure my trauma defaults associated to the Trauma Female. Again, last name trauma with a unique number, first name female, and my ID that the system is going to generate automatically. That's going to be 4 digits. Now, if I'm going to do a lot of these, I can actually put 2 of the 4 unique numbers, and now I'm going to have an 8-digit patient ID. Save my changes. Now, what does this do for me? If I have a trauma patient that comes in, I'm going to go back to my main menu and save my changes. When I select Study Data, I have a button on the bottom of the screen that says Trauma. When I select the Trauma button, I have an option of choosing my Trauma Male or my Trauma Female. If I select my Trauma Female, you'll notice that the name along with that unique number is populated not only here in the last name but also in my ID field. So the next patient that I do is going to be 0002, and continues on until you reach the 9,999 patient, where you're going to have to start over again. Once my trauma patient has come up on my screen and I'm ready to obtain an image, I just have to add the views of the images that I'm going to be shooting. So if I wanted to do a wrist, I can add those views as well. And now I'm ready to shoot those images.